Welcome to Early Stoppage, a new podcast here on the Cageside Press Podcast Network, a show where the news of the day is usually given just enough time, but sometimes not enough. On this episode, we will discuss Greg Hardy's self-awareness, Rory McDonald's conscience, and Babalu Sobral's brain. But we begin with Brock Lesnar. I'm joined, of course, by my co-host, Mike Straus. Mike, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic, man.
All right, Mike, let's talk about the aforementioned Brock Lesnar. The on-again, off-again Daniel Cormier-Brock Lesnar title fight appears to be off again, and this time for good. Dana White released a statement that Lesnar was retiring and wished him well, and the UFC has pivoted to Cormier-Stipe Miocic rematch. Are you happy with the way things ended, and do you think it's good or bad for the UFC?
Well, there's two parts to that, right? So am I happy with it? I am, because I'm not a big Brock Lesnar fan, and I kind of think, we all know how that fight pretty much would have went. Sure, Lesnar's got a fighting chance, but in reality, Cormier wins that fight 9 out of 10 times with, excluding the fluke. So, I'm happy it didn't happen in that regard. I don't think it's good for the UFC ultimately because, it's a big draw, right? I mean, Lesnar is one of the all-time 2 or 3 biggest draws. So that can't be a good thing for them. But I think in a broader sense, putting my bias aside, I do think it's a good thing for the sport because it doesn't, it's not the right thing to do is to give Stipe the rematch. And that's what's going to happen. So I think it is ultimately good for the sport.
I admire Stipe sort of sticking to his guns. So from that perspective, I'm glad that he got the rematch. Obviously, ever since the fight has happened, people have argued whether or not, it seems like right before the fight, all his accomplishments and where he stood in the heavyweight division history was all touted. And then once he lost, it was like, well, the heavyweight division history isn't that great. He wasn't that impressive. And it was like just not, a couple of weeks later, he was the greatest thing ever to happen. And then they started, dismissing him. So I'm glad that he stuck to his guns. The petty side of me would have wanted him to just make them work a little harder to get him back, but it is what he wanted, and he got what he wanted. So from that perspective, I am glad. I do really want people like Brock Lesnar and the like, if you will, to not be able to come and go as they please from the UFC. So I think this sort of speaks to that as well. And so from that perspective, I'm glad that things kind of went the way they did. And listen, I don't want to say the first fight was a fluke because I don't want to take away from Daniel Cormier's accomplishment, but I do think there's a better fight in the two of them.
John, Greg Hardy's back in the news, and in our rundown, not for the best reasons. He did have a big payday for his victory over pretty much an unknown in Dmitry Smolenkov, but after the fight, he compared himself to Bo Jackson. His coach said, Hardy, going back to his domestic violence, he said if that was malicious, that girl would have been dead. Now, John, for Greg Hardy, for all of his enormous talents and everything, do you think that his lack of self-awareness is going to eventually come back and be a problem for him?
Mike, I'll say this. When has anyone's self-awareness ever really bit them in the ass in history? I mean, we've had presidents that lack self-awareness. We've had athletes that lack self-awareness. They say ignorance is bliss, certainly in Greg Hardy's case. He seems to be steering into it. And I think that, although as much as it makes people dislike him, I don't know that it's ever going to put him in a position where it hurts him marketability-wise. I haven't seen the huge protests of him yet. People just seem content to let him do his thing. I think that Greg Hardy is somewhat of a reminder, as much as we think our sport is mainstream, if it were as mainstream as we think it is, then I think there would be some more pushback to Greg Hardy. So I think that his lack of self-awareness and this whole, I want to be the best predator dude, come on, predator.
Mm-hmm.
He always seems to pick the wrong choice of words. And I really, unfortunately, don't think that self-awareness is going to be the thing that gets him. I think ultimately he's just going to run into a heavyweight he's not ready for. What about you?
Yeah, I agree with you, man, with the self-awareness thing. With sports in general, the athletes, when they're enormously talented, they can kind of get by without that trait, without the self-awareness trait. But with Hardy, it's like, for me, I try to genuinely go out of my way to root for a guy like that, believe it or not. Not the domestic violence thing, put that aside, but the underdog, the guy that maybe has a checkered past that overcomes things. again, not the domestic violence, but he just makes it hard to like him. You know what I mean? You mentioned that he doesn't pick the right words, man. And it's not even that he's picking them. It's like he almost goes out of his way to choose the worst ones possible, right? Comparing yourself to Bo Jackson and Michael Jordan after a victory over a guy that didn't want to fight you. What are you doing, man? Yeah, I don't get it, man. He's lacking something.
All right, Mike, up next, Bellator welterweight champion Rory McDonald, fresh off his disappointing draw with John Fitch in the Bellator welterweight Grand Prix, a result where he did not get the nod from any of the judges but kept the belt and moved on. Decided to find Jesus in the ring and proclaim he was no longer interested in hurting people. Now, amid the backlash of that, McDonald has confirmed his fight with Neiman Gracie and said he's not retiring. Mike, McDonald has always had an odd relationship with fighting. And he kind of went a little bit more into this when he spoke with Ara Helwani. But what do you think's going on in this kid's head?
Man, I don't know. You got to, a big part of me admires him and respects him because he said what was on his mind. I really feel that that's how he was genuinely feeling at that moment. I don't even think that he cared about what the backlash was going to be. He just really, he was wearing his heart on his sleeves. And I don't think really we should, I think we've all said things that we maybe haven't meant, and maybe he does mean it, and I think he does mean it to a certain degree, but I don't think there's anything wrong, man, with him questioning it because, what he has to do on a daily basis to get ready to do that, I can't even imagine, what those guys do to get into that mindset. And if he's having second thoughts and it's because religion's not my thing, but hey, if it's his thing, that's awesome. If it's going to make him a better person, it's just a weird situation, man. I don't know. What do you think?
I've been accused by people in my life, bosses, women, everybody, of being very black and white and sort of taking the polar sides of things. Now, on the one hand, you could say, well, that seems like you're bipolar. And on the other hand, it could just be that I deal in extremities, right? And I feel like that's Rory McDonald as well. Rory McDonald, on the one hand, is like, I have to be this savage guy that wants to go in there and just completely murder my opponent and the Canadian psycho of it all. And then now it's like he completely went the other way with it. And I do applaud him. Religion's not necessarily my thing either, but I do applaud him if he found something that brought some peace to his heart. I just think that if he can't find those shades of gray in his life, he's always going to be like, well, I went too far this way, or I went too far that way, and he's never going to quite find that balance. What happens, my concern for a guy like Rory McDonald is what happens, and this may have happened in that fight, and it may be what led to the draw, but what happens when you're channeling your religion in the midst of a fight, and it puts you in danger. And you got to go in there with football players say sometimes that once you no longer have the will to hit, you might as well just get out of there, right? And I think that if Rory McDonald has lost the will to inflict damage, then what? I'll give you the better example. A fighter once said, I wish I could remember who it was. He said, when I went in there into the cage worrying more about myself than my opponent, like I used to go into the cage worrying I wasn't going to hurt this guy. Mm-hmm. And when I started worrying about myself, it was time to go. So I think that might be where he is. So we'll see.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, John, let's transition from a fighter who probably doesn't want to hurt anybody any longer to a guy that probably has received way too much damage in Natu Babalu Sobral. He was in the news last week. He said he's showing signs of CTE. Now, it's obviously concerning. More fighters we're going to be seeing this in more fighters, but he's worried about his long-term prognosis. Now, he doesn't know if he's going to be able to see his grandkids. John, do you think fighters are going to run towards him, or do you think promoters and fighters are going to help him, or do you think they're going to run away from this guy?
I'll use the example of the NFL and concussions. And for a long time, until it became fiscally responsible to run towards these fighters and towards these football players in terms of like lawsuits and public opinion and all that stuff, they ran away from them. And I think the reason why fighters and football players and anybody who gets into a sport where a lot of damage is inflicted upon you runs away is because you don't want to think about your own mortality. And I think that these guys don't want to look at a beaten down fighter and say that could be me, as opposed to saying, this is the life that I've chosen. This is what could happen to me. And I want to have things in place for when I reach where, Babalu Sobral is. I want to have a pension or like a medical, long-term medical and all that. I think that promoters and fighters should run towards him. I think they will run away from him because he's a reminder of how dangerous the sport really is.
Interesting. Yeah, anytime I see a fighter come, and maybe this is just me being a dick, or maybe this is me thinking like you in extremities, but to me, whenever a fighter comes out and complains about CTE, I think, yeah, okay. It's like the smoker that smoked for 20 years and then wonders why he has lung cancer. I'm sorry, I can't feel bad for you. You chose an occupation where you get into fist fights, and oftentimes, or at least it was back in the day, your training was harder than the actual fight, and that's something you did every day, multiple times a day. So you cannot tell me that you knew that wasn't hurting your brain or your body in terrible ways. You chose to do it, So, is it a bad thing? Sure, I don't wish any terribleness on anybody, right? But I can't really feel bad for the guy because you chose to be a mixed martial artist and get in there and have fistfights with guys for a living. I agree with you. I think everybody's going to run away with him, or run away from him rather, because as you said, he could be the poster boy at this point for taking too much damage.
All right, Mike. Paulo Costa was suspended 6 months by USADA for prohibited IV use. Certainly didn't stop his ability to book fights, as he has been scheduled for a fight with Yoel Romero for a Khabib Ferguson-esque fourth time. Mike, was the penalty big enough, being that he will come off it with the biggest fight of his life?
Probably not, right? I mean, we have these things in place, and we see them played out. We see USADA, and we see punishments getting executed, but it seems like there's a big disparity, right? If your name's John Jones or if your name's Paulo Costa, certain guys are getting the benefit of the doubt in certain situations. I know that this is a little bit different, but still, he should have a bigger punishment, because this shows other guys that come in behind him, they can, hey, unfortunately, we live in a world where people will weigh, hey, if my punishment is only this, I could be back fighting in this, and if I get this, I mean, look what TJ Dillashaw, he was already at the top of his game. So, I don't know why cheaters cheat, but they are going to, and I think we should punish them harder. What do you think?
I agree. I think that it has to be. It depends on how serious you're going to be about this stuff. And in the end, the commissions and obviously USADA and one thing I want to make clear to fans who don't know this, I think that people have always sort of connected the Golden Snitch, Nowitzki, to the USADA. He's a member of the UFC. So when he comes down and he has something going on in his world, he is not speaking in terms of as a representative of USADA in any way. They do work hand in hand, and I understand that. But so for me, I think, anybody that can come off of any penalty in a better situation than they went into it, that's like coming out of jail with a great job waiting for you. It didn't really deter you from your life's path or whatever you were doing that the problem was. Now, I guess we would have to figure out how seriously we'd have to take prohibited IV use. And is it as serious as like what TJ Dillashaw did or what some other people have done? And that's really where I think the thing sort of gets parsed out. I don't think it's as bad as some of the stuff those guys did. So I do think that that he shouldn't be come out of it in better shape, but I don't know how you regulate that. I don't know how you say, hey, we're going to give you 6 months, and at the end of that 6 months, you have to take a shitty fight. Right. The guy's going to get what the UFC wants to give him, and they're going to wait because he's one of the better fighters in the UFC.
And just real quick, I don't think that the IVU should be even illegal anyway, but I'm just saying if it's a rule and it's broke, boom, punish him. But yeah, I agree. But let me ask you this. Cowboy Cerrone has never looked better, in my opinion, but he won again, man, on Saturday night, John. But this time, the only fight it seems that he wants now is either Khabib for the championship or Conor McGregor. That name's been thrown out there before. Is this the best Cerrone we've ever seen, in your opinion, John?
It's funny. I've talked to a lot of people about this, and they tell me their belief is that it's not, because he's been on better runs before. I don't think he's ever been this close to the belt before. So that's from my perspective. And I know he's fought Ben Henderson, and I know he's held a WEC belt, but I feel like with the 155-pound division, what it is, and his place in it, he has been maybe more successful in thinner divisions in history. But I mean, we got like 5 guys at the top of 155 pounds that are like arguably some of the best fighters in the history of 155 pounds. We have Khabib, we have Poirier, we have Ferguson, we have Conor, we have all these guys at 155 pounds. And then for him to be mentioned with those guys as a potential, next fight for Khabib or Conor or whomever, I think that means that he's peaking right now. I don't know if that's because of he's a dad now. I don't know what it is, but I think this is the best Cowboy we've ever seen. What do you think?
Yeah, as I said, I do too, and I guess I'll clarify why I think it is. Just because, it almost seems like it's the dad thing, right? I mean, it has to be. He said it time and time again, and there is something to it. I'm a father, and there is something to it when your kids are born. It changes something, and it's one of those things where your parents told you, you'll when you have kids, and then you're okay, and then you have, and you're like, oh, okay, I get it, and it's almost like that happened with him now, right? Like he gets it. He never cared about the belt, but he gets it now. And it took the birth of his son, man. And it's beautiful to see because we're seeing it now. And, some of those guys like BJ Penn and some of those guys that have this tremendous talent but never really took it seriously. Look what BJ Penn did. He never took the shit seriously, But we're seeing Cowboy take it seriously, man. It's a beautiful thing because he's being mentioned in the talks with the guys that you mentioned, and I do think that all those guys are probably some of the best ever. So it's a special thing to witness, man. Cowboy's amazing right now.
I agree. Let's talk real quick, and we'll get to this. What we think the likelihood of this happening in a little bit, but let's talk about a potential opponent of Cowboys, Conor McGregor. Mike, sales of Conor McGregor's whiskey Proper 12 have topped $1 billion as it's been reported in sales, which in turn has made Conor McGregor an even wealthier man than he already was. Mike, what does Proper 12 being in the black mean for Conor McGregor being in the cage?
That's an interesting question because I don't think it really affects his bottom line too much anymore at this point. I mean, he's such a huge name. I mean, Conor McGregor, everybody, my mom knows who he is. That's disgusting in a way, right? I mean, certain people when they know think it's not cool anymore, but yeah, I don't think Conor really. I don't think he needs his Proper 12. I don't think he needs that to do well or not. I think it could fold tomorrow and he'd still be okay. $100 million goes a long way, and I know he's spending it, but still, he's probably invested some of that in other areas, I would imagine. But I don't know, man. I haven't really been following it. What do you think?
I think that anything that impedes upon Conor McGregor getting into the cage, one of the reasons why he goes into the cage is it's money driven, right? For a while. Now, I think that maybe where I agree with you is I think that he had enough money to sort of take his time and determine really what he wanted to do with his career after he fought Floyd Mayweather. So I think all this Proper 12 money is just like, now he's in Scrooge McDuck territory where he's just swimming in the coins and all that. And that's great for him, and I'm glad. I do think it means that the UFC can't muscle him anymore. And I don't know if they can muscle him after the Mayweather fight either. So I don't know. I don't think that he's super interested in getting in the cage in a fight that does not benefit him. I think he's very much in Floyd Mayweather territory now, where he has the kind of money that he's going to do things his way. And the more money Proper 12 makes, the longer that pushes that back. But in the end, Conor's going to realize, hopefully, much in the way Cerrone had his realization and his epiphany, Conor McGregor's epiphany should be that no matter how much money I have, my window of my prime closes the longer I stay out of the cage. So it becomes harder to get back in there and be successful the longer I wait. So I'm hoping that the martial artist in him will realize that there's no good going to come for his career in waiting longer to get back in the cage.
Well put.
All right, here we go. So we had the opening block. It was a lot to process there. So now we're going to give you our segment called 5 Minutes to Recover. 5 Minutes to Recover is where we take 5 minutes to talk to someone who is in the news or a part of something that is currently relevant. Lance Palmer is certainly a relevant member of the PFL. The PFL starts their second season tomorrow night, and they'll be on ESPN. I want to talk to you a little bit later about a tweet that I had in a segment I did not tell you about that I'm going to surprise you with, but I think you'll like it. Kind of set this interview up a little bit, Mike.
Yeah, so I talked to Lance earlier in the week. Of course, Lance is one of the defending champions in the PFL, which starts this Thursday. So definitely check that out, man. They signed that amazing deal with ESPN Plus, which I think is going to be huge for them. But anyway, back to the Lance interview. We caught him in the car, man. He was coming out of one of his morning workouts. And he's just such a super cool guy, man. He's talking about training with Frank Yeager and all those guys. I really think you're going to enjoy it, man.
All right, fans, there you have it, and here you go.
To recover with Lance Palmer. Lance, the Party Palmer. What's going on, man?
Not much, man. Just left sparring at Nick Catone's and heading to get some groceries now. We're heading into like the last hard week and a half here before the fight.
Yeah, you don't stop, huh? You're always doing something. You're always going. You're always looking to improve. You're always looking to get better. It's part of your DNA, man. That's what makes you a champion, right?
Yeah, I think it really is. I mean, I've always done that. Even as a little kid, my dad took me to all the best wrestling practices. Like, we traveled all over the place in Northeast Ohio to get the best guys in the room, the best practice. Like, that's just what I've always done. So for me to be stagnant, that's something you probably won't see. And if you do, it'll probably be time for me to hang it up.
Yeah, and we're probably still a while away from that, man. You're only 32 years old. You've never looked better. You're on a 6-fight win streak, and of course, the new PFL season kicks off this Thursday, May 9th. That's going to be the welterweights and the women lightweights, but Thursday, May 23rd is the featherweights and the lightweights, and we're going to see the party.
Yeah, man, I'm excited about it. It's cool to go into a new season with it's like a fresh slate. I mean, win or lose, like guys that had lost last year in the season, or guys that didn't make the finals, or guys who didn't make it into the top 8, like these are all, it's just another season to, show up and prove that you can be better this year. And that's what I'm looking to do. I'm looking to be a better version of myself from last year. And, regardless of having those 5 wins throughout the season last year, I mean, there's always something to improve on. And I'm always looking to improve each fight. So that's what I'm looking to do on May 23rd. And, I have a tough opponent in Alex Gilpin. He's 12-1, and he was on Dana White's Contender Series, and he won his fight on there. And, he just didn't get picked up by the UFC, but he's a guy that many people may not know who he is, but he's still tough. But I've dealt with that a lot in my career of fighting guys that aren't really well known, but they're tough guys. So, it's one of those things that I'm used to dealing with, kind of. But I'm excited for this fight, and I'm excited to get this season kicked off.
Anybody that has followed your career, man, I mean, you're one of the very best out there doing it at 145 pounds. And you mentioned that you're always looking to improve. And anybody that saw your run through the PFL season last year, they're probably thinking, where can this guy improve? What have you really been kind of focusing on? Because you're so complete, man. You're such a good fighter.
I think more than improving, it's more just opening up, using all of my game. And I mean, obviously we saw a lot of wrestling and grappling we saw a lot of striking too, don't get me wrong, but wrestling is my bread and butter. And that's something that I've gotten better at, setting up my wrestling with better striking and my kicks and everything else. So when it gets into the heat of the battle and I get into those situations where the takedown comes, it's because it's open. I don't try and force the takedown, and I really feel comfortable with my striking in there. But I feel that getting better for me now just means to implement everything of my game, my kicks, my punching. I mean, when I talk to guys and when I train with guys, they're like, man, you have some heavy hands. If you just let your hands go in these fights, you're going to be putting guys away. And that's just something that it's kind of difficult in a way, because guys don't really get close enough to me because of my wrestling. So I kind of have to, I have to kind of get them to come in to set up the takedowns, or if I'm trying to strike, I have to kind of use my wrestling to get back to my striking. So it's one of those things of just opening up, and that's what Mark Henry has helped me a lot with this camp. I've been in New Jersey this camp, and I'm probably going to be here for a long time. And last year I was planning to come out here to New Jersey and train with these guys, but Timur Valiev was in the tournament, so I didn't want to step on his toes and come out here while we may have fought each other last year. this has always been the plan for me to come out and train with Mark Henry and Frankie and Marlon and Eddie Alvarez and Ricardo Almeida. And I mean, it's a great place, and these guys took me with open arms, and I'm excited, and I'm excited to be closer to home. That was one of the big decisions for me, is just being closer to my wife. It's a long season, and it's a long time away from home, and my wife just can't pick up and leave wherever I go because she has a full-time job, and that's just life. But we make it work, and I'm closer to home, and I'm happier to be close to home. I can make a trip back to Ohio any weekend I want to, and kind of just spend a little time with her, and that's something that's more important to me than anything else.
Well, hey, Lance, you're a class guy, man. I truly appreciate you fitting me in here, man. I know you're super busy, especially as your fight gets closer here on the 23rd. So best of luck to you, man, and I'm sure we'll touch base again soon.
Thank you very much, man. It was good talking to you. Hopefully talk to you soon.
Welcome back, and we move on to our first segment, post 5 minutes to recover. Over-under. Mike and I take the over-under on a number of MMA subjects. I'll begin. Mike, what is the over-under on number of times Brock Lesnar retires before he actually retires? I'll set it at 0.5. Says, I really want to know if you think he's coming back. You got the over or the under?
I will say under.
You think he's gone for good?
I think he's gone for good. I don't think we're going to see. I think if we were going to see him, this was going to be it, right? He was going to be guaranteed a heavyweight title shot. I don't necessarily know if he waits. I don't know if he ever gets that chance again, right? So I just can't. I don't really see him coming back for anything but that, because he's a big man. That's a big ego, you know.
I tend to agree. The only pushback that I would have to that is we'd have to understand what he thinks about the fight. And I think Brock Lesnar has a number that he wants to get paid for a risk he's willing to take. And I think he would have been in for a nice ass whipping from Daniel Cormier, and they didn't pay him enough money to take that ass whipping.
Yeah.
All right, you're up.
Okay, what's the over-under on Dominic Cruz saying something condescending to John Anik? I feel like it happens at least 10 times per card, but let's give Cruz the benefit of the doubt here and let's say 7. What do you think, over or under?
You know, I hope that Dominic Cruz possesses the self-awareness that Greg Hardy lacks. He realizes that he is – and listen, God bless Anik. Everyone, on Sunday Morning Corner Man, which I do with Keith Schillen, I always kind of throw an Anikism in there here and there, stuff like that. When one of my things that I can't stand about announcers is when they say, oh, he's a true 6'7". Okay, yeah. So another guy's an untrue – so Anik's good for that kind of stuff occasionally. But it's almost like – Cruz can't get away with it with DC. He really can't get away with it with Rogan. But Anik's the one guy who he can kind of have mental superiority over and just completely push him and he calls him Anik, which is a Cruz thing. I mean, he's a last name kind of guy. I get it. But I'm gonna give Dominic Cruz the benefit of the doubt as well and go for the under. What do you think? Yeah,
I'll go under too. But it's going to be close, right? It'll probably be. It wouldn't surprise me, but I'll go under. I like Dominic Cruz. I really like what he does in the commentary booth. However, I think when it's him and Rogan together with the third guy, that dynamic is a little off to me. But when it's just Cruz and Anik, I rather enjoy it.
I agree, and I think Rogan and Cormier are good.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
All right, up next, Mike, what is the over-under? We just talked to Lance Palmer. PFL starts tomorrow night. The great thing about the PFL, for fans that don't know, is the format. And Ariel Helwani, if you haven't seen it, he did a great piece on sort of explaining he did it in like a minute and a half, God bless him, for explaining the PFL and all the rules and all that stuff. So if you haven't seen it, go check it out. But fighters are given more points based on finishing. So if you finish in the first round, you get more points if you finish in the third round or if you go to decision. So my question for you is there are 10 fights on the card. So let's set the over-under at 5. How many fights do you think tomorrow night go to decision?
Oh, I say under. I say under 5, definitely. I say we'll probably only have 2 or 3. Well, like I know anything, right? I would say 2 or 3. Only because, man, I was watching a couple of the weigh-ins earlier today. I had a few minutes here. The one Ray Cooper, I forget the guy he's fighting. I forget the gentleman's name. I'm sorry. It's like I don't even want to try to pronounce it because I'll get it wrong. But those guys got some genuine dislike, and having attended a PFL, I could tell you that those dudes are really going out there, man, for the finish. And you've watched the first season kind of go, and with the first season, everybody was kind of wondering how this was going to be. Is it going to be fluky? Is it even going to last to the second season? Well, now you're seeing they signed Jordan Johnson, they signed David Michaud, they signed a couple of big name guys now. They signed a couple more too, but people are taking this seriously now. They signed an ESPN Plus deal. This is going to get bigger and bigger, man, and they're going to bring it. I really think there's going to be less than 5. What do you think?
I agree, and it's interesting. And the name of the guy who's fighting Ray Cooper is Zane Kamaka.
Okay, there you go.
So the thing about that I find interesting about this points system and all that, I thought that it was going to be where the guys were trying to gain points for some sort of competitive advantage. I don't think that's it. I think that it's more about bragging rights. Because I don't know that in these divisions, it seemed like last year almost everybody made the playoffs, right?
Mm-hmm.
If there was 10 fighters in the thing, 8 made it. So, yeah, it's important to get your points, but I think that they like being the guy that got the finishes. They like being the guy at the top. So the fact that there's a leaderboard, if there's ever a leaderboard, someone's always going to want to be at the top of it.
Yep.
I think that that's a motivator as well, to be the guy that's leading in the points throughout the season. So I like the PFL. I think the ESPN Plus deal is amazing. In our segment that we're going to do a little bit later that I'm going to surprise you with, I'll even give you the title of it, Mike. It's called 140 More. And 140 More is you and I are both going to look at 2 tweets that we did this week, and we're going to say what we would say if we had the benefit of 140 more characters.
Okay.
So I got one lined up for you. You're going to love it. All right, up next is What's the Line? Mike and I will discuss what the odds are that something will happen in the world of MMA. Mike, this time you can start.
All right, what's the line? John Jones and Daniel Cormier competing in the trilogy.
Man, this is a tough one. I wanted to do money line. I guess we could do odds 10-1. It doesn't really matter. I would say 20-1. 20-1 feels like. I think that Cormier, it seems like he wants it. Jones seems like he wants it. I really think they should have nothing to do with each other, because if you're John Jones, if you lose the third fight, everyone's going to say the first 2 were tainted. And if you're Daniel Cormier and you lose the third fight, what was the point of any of it? If I was Cormier, honestly, I would just continue to spend the rest of my career calling John Jones a cheater and never fight him again. I would discredit those 2 wins based on his PED use, and then just say, listen, I beat everybody that was clean. How about that? Because you kind of talk a little bit out of both sides of your mouth when you say, I don't want to – John Jones is a cheat, but I'd love to fight Brock Lesnar. So, what do you think? What do you think the odds are we see these guys?
Yeah, I go probably 10-1. I think it's definitely going to happen. But yeah, you raise a good point, because what is the point really? I always thought the intriguing part would be to see it at heavyweight, but Cormier was just on Ariel Helwani's show, and he said, no, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen at 205. So that to me is like, really? Because as you mentioned, like what you laid out is perfect. I beat everybody that was clean. He's a cheat. That's perfect. But at heavyweight, I think it's interesting, and I think ultimately that's where it's gonna end up happening, is at heavyweight, 10-1.
I agree. Speaking of trilogy fights, let's move on. Mike, what's the line on Conor McGregor and Nate Diaz completing their trilogy?
I'll go 5-1. I'm even more certain this is gonna happen. This just seems like the right fight, right? Not at this moment, but I would say probably the Cowboy fight, I think, is really going to happen with Conor, and then after that, I think, is the fight for Nate. I think that it's definitely going to happen, because who else do you really want to see Nate Diaz fight? Who else do you really want to see Conor McGregor fight? Of course, Conor McGregor wants to fight everybody, but I think it almost has to happen, because look what happened in the first fight. Look what happened in the second fight. It's not like you have a clear-cut winner in both fights. So if ever there was a fight that needed to have the trilogy to kind of put the exclamation point on the victor, this is it, right?
100%. So I agree with you. I would almost even go a little bit better. Here's where I'm coming from. Because this doesn't have to happen in the UFC. These guys are young enough. Now, Nate's 34. Conor's a little bit younger. But I think that this fight doesn't have to have anything connected to it except for the 2 guys. Meaning Conor could lose his next 3 fights and get like wiped out in all 3 fights, and people would still want to see him fight Nate. So this fight is always going to be a fight people want to see because of the 2 people that are in it. It doesn't matter the circumstances. So Conor doesn't need to keep winning. Nate doesn't need to come back and beat somebody. Whenever this fight happens, if it happens International Fight Week this year, next year, 10 years from now on a riverboat, 15 years. I mean, people are always going to want to see this fight. So I'm with you. I think there's a high likelihood they're always going to be able. That's a check that those 2 both have on their dresser that they can cash whenever they want, and it's probably a $5 million check. So it's bound to happen. Somebody's always going to be willing to give them that kind of money, even for a one-off. I mean, imagine if Golden Boy had done that. There would definitely have been a second Golden Boy fight. So if Conor waits till his contract runs out, there's just so many ways it could happen that I can't see it not happening. All right, you're up.
What's the line Jordan Burroughs ever sets foot in the octagon?
This is a tough one for me because a lot of wrestlers think that they can go into the octagon, and then when it comes down to it, they realize there's a larger, there's more that they have to overcome to actually do it. I will say this: Jordan Burroughs is 30. I saw a meme today where Daniel Cormier started at 30 and Yoel Romero started at 32. So from that perspective, I like it. One thing I will say that for all the shit Ben Askren gets from the UFC, he sure does them a hell of a lot of favors. And one of the favors that he does them is a lot of media. Another favor he did them is by stepping in with Jordan Burroughs, it makes people think, maybe even Jordan Burroughs, that this is more realistic. That Jordan Burroughs thinks that if I can hang with this guy who's the best wrestler in the UFC, or arguably one of them, then I can maybe do this. So I would set it at 15-1. What do you think?
The hard part to this one for me is octagon. Excluding it to the UFC. But when you think about it, Jordan Burroughs isn't going to fight anywhere but the UFC. But then he has to have that very first fight in the UFC. So a lot goes into it. So I'll say 30-1, and the reason I think there's a fair likelihood it could happen, but Jordan Burroughs is really special, right? We got to really see when you dedicate 100% of your time to one discipline. We got to see what that looks like, because Ben Askren is no joke. As you mentioned, he could wrestle. The dude is good, but what Jordan Burroughs did to him is to steal a Joe Roganism. There's levels to the game, right? There's levels to that game. And Jordan Burroughs is man, I don't think wouldn't even need to learn how to throw a punch with that wrestling.
And the interesting thing that I thought about it was that Ben Askren knew going into that. Because a lot of people have said, well, Ben Askren wrestles differently than Jordan Burroughs does. And I think Askren knew going in that he was going to be at a disadvantage, but he knew that if he gets waxed by Burroughs, he can say, well, now meet me in the octagon. And there's some money in that. So I think it was a smart move on his part. All right, let's move on. What's the line that David Branch would be a millionaire if he stayed with the World Series of Fighting / PFL?
Ooh, I'll say 50-1 because
50-1. You don't think he would have won his division had he stayed in the PFL?
No, I've never been a big David Branch fan. That being said, he has done very well for himself outside of the UFC. He's been a champion in I think 2 or 3 organizations outside of the UFC. But they had some killers, man. He would have fought in what? He would have fought in middleweight, right?
Yeah, well, he was the double champ in World Series Fighting before they folded. So he could have fought 205 and he could have fought 85.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, depending. There was he could have. Lewis, I'm a big Lewis Taylor guy, and what he did to Magomed Karamov, what he did in the finale was amazing. That one punch, that leaping hook, remember? That was incredible. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think David Branch, I give him a 50-1 because I think that he could have had a shot, but I don't know. There's something about David Branch where he gets under the bright lights. He doesn't quite live up to his potential. And I know that the PFL is far from the bright lights, but $1 million makes the lights pretty bright,
I agree. I give him way better chances than you do. Yeah. I think 5-1, man. He was double champion. Wow. Fighting. I completely agree with you. So, okay, let's look at it this way. he would have fought either at 205 or 85, right? The champion at 205 was Sean O'Connell. The champion at middleweight at 185 was Lewis Taylor. So that's tough for me.
He could take it looking at it like that. I think that he has a very good chance to beat either one of those guys in a single fight. But there was much more, there was much more that went into it.
That's true.
In a single fight, I think he beats those guys. Easy.
Well, he already beat Lewis Taylor, so back in the day.
Exactly.
So, exactly. Yeah, that's interesting. It would have been interesting. One of the questions I posed to a couple of guys before is, does he regret leaving? And I don't quite know what the answer to that is. All right, let's move on. Next up, Mike and I make the hard choices in a game of MMA Would You Rather. I'll begin. Mike, would you rather see Donald Cerrone fight for the belt or fight Conor McGregor?
Oh, no question. I want to see Donald Cerrone fight for the belt. Not a big Conor McGregor guy. I mean, yeah, he's a good fighter, but if the guy doesn't want to fight, then I don't think we should. I don't think people should chase the guy and treat him like he's the be all end all. When a guy puts out a tweet at 2:00 in the morning and I got to get up and write a story about it, that's ridiculous. So I want to see him fight for the title. I know that he's been a champion at he was a champion at the WEC, right? 100 was that 155? Yeah. For some reason I always think that he fought at featherweight in WEC I don't know why. But yeah, man, I want to see him fight for the belt because, as we said earlier, I think this is the best Cerrone ever, and a Cerrone that is taking stuff seriously. I think that he could really contend, man. That being said, if Khabib's the champion, I don't know if I want to see that fight.
Yeah, I'll take the Conor fight. I think it's an exciting fight, and I'd like to see Donald get the payday.
All right. Would you rather have GSP back or Greg Hardy gone?
That's a tough one. Because I feel the same. I feel similarly that you do about Greg Hardy, having to cover him and having to contend with the fact that he's constantly in co-main events he doesn't deserve against guys he should be fighting, not in the part of the card that he should. With that being said, there's a lot of great fights in the UFC for George St. Pierre, and I would probably rather have GSP back. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd rather have GSP back, I think, too, right? Because, I mean, I think he can still get it done. I think he's a once in a lifetime talent, and I think a GSP, even at this stage in his career, is better than a lot of guys. So, yeah, let's see GSP back, man.
This is probably an easy one. I threw it in there just for, why not? Would you rather have one more fight from CM Punk or no more fights from BJ Penn?
Yeah, no more fights for BJ. Let's just, what are you doing, man? He's fighting this weekend against another guy that, should he be fighting Clay Guida? So who knows? Who knows if either of those guys should be fighting? But yeah, come on, BJ. You don't need, he's a legend. And the only thing this does, man, is it just tarnishes his record. I don't know. I hate to see these guys that we grew up watching that they were just so they transcended the sport for a brief moment in time. And now it's just, I don't know, man. It leaves me, it takes a part of me, it really does. It hurts me in a weird way. But what do you think, man? What did you rather see?
I'm with you. I think no more fights for BJ Penn. I just think that, and he's already in the Hall of Fame, so he had the moment where he was on stage and they played his highlights and I just don't know what the end game here is. I don't know why he keeps. Is it a money thing? Is it I just want to go out the right way? Because all the fights are random. Like if he was holding out for like a Hawaii card, or if he was holding out for like something that made sense to me, right? The right opponent. I want to go out against this guy. Maybe, obviously he doesn't fight anymore, but like if he wanted to fight Jens Pulver one more time, or if he wanted to, like if it was something that has some significance, but it's like, I don't know if he's like, his job is to put over young fighters anymore, to find a way to get his own victory. I just don't know the motivation. That's what and if there's no motivation and there's no real reason for you to be doing it, why take all this punishment? And it's not so much that I'm concerned about how he gets changed in my mind. I'm concerned about that. I don't like seeing fighters take, they're grown men. They don't need me to lecture them, but I don't like them seeing them take unnecessary punishment for no apparent reason.
Yeah.
Right, you're up.
Yeah. Would you rather have the flyweight division remain or the 165-pound division?
Whew, that's a tough one. I tend to lean a little bit towards Dana White in the sense that I think the 165-pound division would make the 55 and 70-pound divisions worse. And I like that they're stacked. I do think that I wish there was a way for, as much as we like to fighter empowerment and all that, player empowerment in other sports, I do think that these stacked divisions would be a lot better if we can get everybody in the cage where we wanted them to be. We can't seem to get the fights that we want when we want them. So the divisions being stacked just kind of frustrate us. I don't know why people think that a 165-pound division would cure that. So I'm going to go with the flyweight division just because I think that division's been working hard for a lot of years and deserves to stick around. What are your thoughts?
Man, I got a ton of thoughts on this, more so than we could fit in this brief section. So I'll try to condense them here. I would rather have the flyweight division remain, but only because I want to see a 65, but I don't just want to see a 65. I want to see a weight class every 10 pounds. I want to see so we got 55. I want to see a 65. I want to see no more 70. So you got the 65, you'll have a 75, you'll have an 85, you'll have a 95. You already got the 205. And then at that point, you go 225. And then you go, I don't know, maybe a 265, where we're at now, 265. And then you go, or you don't even let him weigh in. Because in my opinion, heavyweight shit, you should be able to weigh. If you're an athletic 350 pounds, so be it. But I'd like to see a weight class every 10 pounds. And until we get to that point, let's not play this let's add one here and take one away. No, man. Let's just keep what we got until we decide to really do this.
All right. Okay, so now we've moved on to the segment. So I'm going to read my tweet, and I'll get your thoughts on it. And I'm going to read your tweet, and then I'll ask you to defend it. So here's my tweet. And I'll tell you what I would have said had I had 140 more characters. So my tweet was, I'm calling it now. Within 2 years, the winner of the PFL tournaments will be given, in addition to the $1 million, a contract with the UFC. ESPN will make UFC and PFL partners, and PFL will serve as a feeder league. If I had 140 more characters, what I would have expounded on that to say is that them being rivals doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense for ESPN. And I think ESPN has the financial wherewithal and the juice to sort of make it apparent to them that, hey, it makes more sense us working together. And obviously, I think being a feeder league to the UFC benefits PFL in a lot of ways. Having a connection to the UFC and having there be another thing to give to fighters. Because if you had to choose between Bellator and PFL, and this is way more than 140 characters, but if you had to choose between Bellator and PFL, it might be, the $1 million is there. But if you knew that by not only winning the $1 million, you would then go to the UFC, your life has completely changed. One season in the PFL, now you're a millionaire, and you're in the UFC. I just think it makes a lot of sense, and I think it makes a lot of sense for ESPN. What are your thoughts on that tweet?
When did you write that?
Today.
Okay. All right. Because I was going to say, did you I was wondering if you predicted this a while ago. I was going to be you're amazing. Yeah, man, I agree with you. I think that makes a ton of sense. It's interesting when you mentioned the Bellator and the PFL. What would you rather? I'm kind of thinking I would probably still go for Bellator, but I'll tell you what, man, PFL in 1 year, they've really closed the gap. They really have closed that gap. Not that they're going heads up against Bellator, but they've really put a good product down in a short period of time, and it makes your tweet makes perfect sense, man. Let's do it. That sounds great.
All right, now you're up. Just so you know, I'm going to give you a hint what's coming.
Okay.
There may be some dragon fire coming your way, Mike. Just
so I think
very
I know.
Unpopular opinion, Game of Thrones is the most overrated show ever. I've tried watching this show on 2 separate occasions with my wife. While she and most people have always loved it, I think it's a poor ripoff of AD&D. Mike, if you had 140 more characters, what would you say? Or did you sufficiently shred Game of Thrones in the 140 characters you were provided?
No, I could go, man. Yeah, so I had to look into this because I wanted to originally say Skyrim, right? But turns out that Game of Thrones is actually written in the 90s. So it predates the video game Skyrim. However, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, which, yes, I did play growing up, has been around since the 70s. And I'm sorry, but that show is a complete ripoff down to the the towns, even the city names are ripoffs of town. We got White One and River Run. You got Winterhold and Winterfeld. I mean, they ripped this shit off completely, and no one's talking about it. No one's doing shit because it's got cool fucking special effects and it's got fucking drag. Dude, I was fucking around with dragons 20 fucking years ago. The shit don't do it for me. It's done. It's poorly done. It's everybody talks about how it's like a movie every week. Well, just watch a fucking movie then. Like, I don't get it. The stories aren't that cool. Like, I'm sitting there watching episodes with my wife, and I'm trying to get into it, because 100 million people can't be wrong. Yeah, they are. Fucking show's dumb. That's not what it said.
And listen, this isn't a conversation for another day. I'm so deep in the Game of Thrones game, you have no idea. I'm giving fan theories, but I love your take, so I can't sit here and argue with you about it. All right, we end our podcast like all mediocre fighters, just trying to get out of here with a win. In the segment we call On Our Bicycle. Mike, I'll start. And these are just quick hitters. You can answer them quickly. Michael Chandler says he is jealous of USADA and wishes they were testing him. What are Chandler's motivations for saying this?
It almost seems like he's trying to entice, cause he's a Bellator guy, right? He's not going anywhere. He re-upped, I don't think he didn't want to say the number of fights, right? But I think we speculated it was like 2 years, something like that. If I'm remembering correctly, could be not remember correctly, but he is very much a Bellator guy, and I don't think he wants to go anywhere. And I think that if he could try to entice Bellator to maybe bring a WADA or an accredited agency in there to kind of get some drug testing, I think that he would definitely spearhead that movement. I think he's kind of throwing it out there to see how they react. What do you think?
Yeah, it's one of two reasons. Either he wants to sort of tout himself as a clean athlete, or he wants to make overtures to the UFC and say, yeah, I wish I was getting tested by USADA. Just kind of like Justin Gaethje used to say, I wish Bruce Buffer would say my name once, my career. Yeah. It's kind of just saying, hey, just in case you're wondering, UFC, if you should maybe take a look at me, I'm open to moving. So that might be it. All right, Mike, you're up.
Michael Bisping, Rich Franklin, they're both going into the Hall of Fame. Do you think they're both worthy?
I do. I think for different reasons. I think both guys had great careers. I think Bisping obviously was the father or the godfather of British fighting. It's taking away from a few guys. I know Ian Freeman's a British fighter. I mean, there's some guys that preceded him, but Bisping's really the one that, in 10 years, 15 years, if there's a slew of British champions, because they watched Michael Bisping growing up. Rich Franklin, I think a lot of his mystique has been taken away from the way that just Anderson Silva just shredded him. But pre-Anderson Silva, he looked like a world beater, and he fought pretty well after Anderson Silva. It was just Anderson Silva had his number. So I think they're both worthy of a Hall of Fame induction for different reasons. What do you think? Yeah,
very much. Michael Bisping, for all the reasons you mentioned, he is still a very, very popular figure in the UK, even though he doesn't even live there anymore. But he's still one of the most popular sports figures. And Rich Franklin, he was the UFC, right? For a long time, he was their dude. They both deserve it, man. I think they're getting this right.
All right, Mike, a meme that got a lot of traction on Twitter showed that Canelo Alvarez made $35 million on last Saturday, while Donald Cerrone made $400,000. Are they equatable stars?
No, they're definitely not equatable stars. Obviously, Canelo is he's probably the biggest star in the game right now, right? In boxing, at least one of the top 2 or 3, right? I mean, that can be argued. He signed that massive deal with DAZN. And Donald Cerrone is really, who really knows who Donald Cerrone? Up until a few years ago, only people who knew who Donald Cerrone were hardcore MMA fans. So they're definitely not equatable stars. But that being said, that pay is a little kind of lot. That pay, something needs to be done, right? We need to do something about that, because it's just, Cerrone is at the top of his game right now, and for him to make $400,000, that's laughable, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think that Canelo is he is the guy that sort of took the mantle. So it was like Julio Cesar Chavez, it was Oscar De La Hoya, and now it's Canelo Alvarez in terms of Mexican fighting fans. And what we know about boxing is that the 2 largest groups of fans are Mexicans and African Americans, right? So if one star, and when you can pit them against each other, it's even more, so that's why Canelo and Mayweather did so well. So I just think that I don't know that Donald Cerrone has a subculture that he can monetize in the way that Canelo does. The more interesting meme that I would like to see is what were the gates and the total money made on both of those cards, and what percentage of that did the fighters get paid? So if Canelo's getting paid at 60% and Cerrone's getting paid at 10%, well, there's some inequity there. But I think that would be the larger issue for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, John. One championship. They instituted a guideline for their agents that can represent their fighters. Now, do you think that is more to protect their fighters, or do you think that's more to enrich the company?
I would say enrich the company only because it seems like as soon as they announced that, it seemed like they also were announcing that they have an agency. And my guess would be all the people that are a part of the agency fit the qualifications that they're put forth in the guidelines for agents, like having to live in Asia for a year. So I think it's very interesting. I don't know that I don't want to say an unintended consequence, but I definitely think the fighters will be protected by these guidelines, but I think you could protect the fighters without making it something that would exclude so many other managers, if that makes sense. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't necessarily know if they needed even to do something like this. Like, did they even need to do that? I don't know. I mean, I guess there's an underlying thing that they wanted to do, but I think you make a lot of sense because they announced their other company, their management program, their management agency that you have to go through. So it's kind of like they have a monopoly on it, right? But some people were wondering if this was to keep a certain manager, out. But I don't think this is. I think that's a lot. Just that they would make one institute a protocol just for one manager. I don't think that's the case. I ultimately think it is to kind of get this other thing going that you mentioned, their agent program. But it's very discriminatory, right? I mean, the whole living in Asia for a year. I mean, I guess I understand that, obviously you don't want criminals involved with your organization. And I think that you're entitled to that as a business. I don't think that you really should have a bunch of backlash, but I think let's call it what it is, though. It's definitely to enrich that other business.
And I will say this, just in closing on that, is that typically they say where there's smoke, there's fire. The one thing I'll say about one championship is there's not a lot of smoke. And what I mean by that is the people they seem to get in business with are people who are kind of beyond reproach. They have Richard Franklin, Chatri has a pretty good reputation, Demetrius Johnson, Eddie Alvarez, Sage Northcutt, Misha Tate. So I cannot imagine those people associating themselves with the weight cutting thing. Was probably smart for the industry. So from that perspective, it makes me feel good about it. But if we applied that same thing, then Ali Abdelaziz would make no sense because he's connected to a lot of people who are above board, and there are some rumors that he's not. So, that it's tricky for me to figure out. All right, Tito Ortiz is signed with Combate Americas, and that's about all we know. A video posted by Amy Kaplan of Fansided let us know that the contract was in fact signed, but there is no opponent, although Alberto Del Rio has been rumored. There's no venue. There's really nothing except for a signed contract. Is this a good move for Combate Americas? And is this a good move for Tito?
Yeah, it's probably a good move for both of them, right? Because no one is really talking about Tito anymore, right? Tito's name is kind of no one is really talking about Tito, but people had kind of forgotten about Tito after he fought. And Combate has a very good audience, right? But I feel like they're not growing. I feel like they've kind of plateaued. And again, they can probably do what they do because they kind of carve that market out and they do very well with what they do. But I feel like if you have a mixed martial arts promotion, I feel like ultimately you want to try to grow, right? And I don't feel like they're doing that. I feel like this could possibly help them, but is he an ambassador or is he going to fight? I don't know. What do you think?
I think he'll probably fight Alberto Del Rio. That makes sense. Alberto Del Rio's been talking about fighting for a while. I met him when I went to cover the Combate Americas that was here in Tucson, and he seems like he still wants to fight. He seems like he's a big. He says the thing that he brings best to the company is he can draw a crowd, right? Because he was a wrestler and he's huge in Mexico. I think an Alberto Del Rio, Tito Ortiz fight in Mexico would be huge.
He's a big guy too, right? Physically.
Yeah, they probably fight a heavyweight.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I think that's where those two fighting in Mexico would probably be where it goes. And if Tito does that, he's smart because if he can market himself properly and sort of transition himself into like a Mexican hero, that might be smart post-career. All right, let's get out of here with a couple picks. We'll just go through the three major cards of the weekend. Mike, who you got? Namajunas or Andrade?
I'm going to go Nami Yunus. I'm going to go Nami Yunus by decision. What about you?
I'll take Andrade. I just have a feeling we're primed for an upset. I think Namajunas is the better fighter, but I just feel like Andrade comes in there swinging for the fences and lands something.
All right. How about Chandler or Pitbull?
I'm going to be a little biased on this one. The Pitbull brothers train kind of here and there at Fight Ready. They're connected to Henry Cejudo's camp, and I'll take Pitbull, although I like Chandler a lot. Who do you think?
I think I'm going to go Chandler. But it wouldn't surprise me in the least bit if Pitbull does do it, because this has kind of gotten personal between these guys, and that could, we've seen Chandler engage in some firefights with Alvarez and whatnot when he gets emotional, and if that turns into that fight, I don't think Chandler could win a firefight against Pitbull. But I'll go Chandler because I think he'll use his wrestling.
And up next, I want to preface this pick or this fight by saying that a lot of people are saying that because there was an opponent change, that it might be a harder fight for Kayla Harrison. So Kayla Harrison or Larissa Pacheco, who do you got?
Well, it probably will be a harder fight, right? But I'll go Kayla. She has it. She's special, man. I think Sarah Kaufman's probably really the only person that could challenge her this year, but I think she gets by Larissa. What about you?
I agree. I think Kayla's being groomed for bigger things, and I think that they have a roster that can test her but not beat her. And I think that what Kayla Harrison winning this season, I think sets her up for a lot of things. It puts a lot more money in her pocket. It makes it easier for her to, and not that she's having issues training now, but I think this is sort of grooved for her. I don't know if she has enough experience to deal with a late opponent change, so that might make things interesting. But in the format that we're in, she could lose and still be okay. So, I like Kayla as well. Okay, guys, there you have it. The first episode of Early Stoppage is in the books. Be sure and comment, subscribe, and like us on YouTube. We will, before we get out of here, Mike, tell people where they can follow you and where you can be read.
BJPenn.com, Low Kick, Cageside Press, YouTube channel, Mike MMA, or just my name, Mike Straus, and all the social media is just Mike MMA.
There you go, guys. And obviously, I can be followed at SM Cornerman and listen to you on the Cageside Press and read on Cageside Press. And there you have it. We'll see you next week. Peace.